really wonderful to be with you this afternoon, and especially to be discussing a topic as important as bullying and the effects of stress and trauma on our youth today, because it really is having an incredible effect that we can no longer ignore. So, as you heard, I am a life coach. I'm also a brain gym facilitator, which means that I work very closely with kids who have learning disabilities and emotional issues and problems. And we basically stimulate the brain, switch the brain back on, in order to get them to the stage where they are learning effectively and coping effectively in their environments. And as Claudia so wonderfully explained to us how trauma has an incredible effect on the brain, I want to take it one step further, because so often we think of trauma as a life-changing event. It's a life or death situation. It's something that is extremely serious. But in my studies within Brain Gym, what we found is that it's not only trauma that has an effect on the brain, but any stressful situation has a negative effect on the brain and immediately puts the individual into a survival mode, or that fight or flight syndrome, which is that response mechanism. And when that happens, the rest of the brain shuts down. So in a trauma situation, it obviously stunts the development of the brain. But even if the brain is developing properly, a simple stressful situation switches the areas of the brain off that are responsible for learning and responsible for wise decision making. And so what we've seen of late, as you're all well aware, is that bullying has become an incredible problem in our schools and in our society and in our environment. And this is causing a tremendous amount of stress on our kids, which is having a knock-on effect. Number one, it affects the kids in the classroom because they are continuously in survival mode. And when your body secretes hormones, basically, your brain doesn't identify the difference between stress as in there's a lion chasing me and I'm going to die, or stress as in I've got an exam to write and I'm really worried. Your brain just recognizes it as stress, and you go into that I'm going to run away or I'm going to fight. And so that's what's happening in our schools, and it is affecting the kids first and foremost because they are no longer able to study the way they used to. Their brains don't function the way they should because they are always on edge, which obviously then affects the teachers because now the teachers are battling to teach them in the classroom. It affects the schools because all of a sudden the pass rate's dropping, and eventually it affects our entire society. So today's topic is one that really does need to be spoken about, and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to talk to you about it. So how I really want to start is with a little metaphor, and the metaphor is that when our children enter the schooling environment, they are like this beautiful blank sheet of paper. They're a blank canvas and they're waiting to have their story written on the canvas. They're excited and they're enthusiastic and they're positive about the world, hopefully, because they've come from a loving environment. What happens is they go out into the school environment, and as they get a little bit older, they are exposed to difficulties and to things which are hard and tough. Perhaps their friend says something nasty to them which makes them feel a little bit insecure and crumples their spirit a little bit. Perhaps they're exposed to a bullying environment and they're bullied and people are being horrible and excluding them from a group. Or perhaps somebody hurts them physically. And with every single experience, it crumples them a little bit more until they're no longer that beautiful blank piece of paper that they were once before, but they are now a much smaller, crumpled up little soul. And as you can see, it's a whole lot harder to write your story on this piece of paper than it was on the original piece of paper. Do you agree? It's all wrinkled and crumpled. You can't write on this. And then slowly what happens is that parents get involved, teachers get involved, counselors get involved, and we start training the kids, but you mustn't be horrible, it's not nice to say those things, it's not good to bully, and so maybe they realize what they've done is wrong. So so they say, okay, I'm so sorry, little Johnny. I didn't mean to say that to you. I'm really sorry. That's not how I feel. I don't think that you're really stupid. You're actually a nice boy. And they try and make it better. And on the outside, it looks better because little Johnny's piece of paper is nice and it's blank again, and he can write his story on it. But we all know that it's actually not better, because the piece of paper is still filled with wrinkles and crumples that you can never get out, no matter how many times you say sorry. You can never, ever get rid of those crinkles. And that's what happens to a child inside when they're bullied. On the outside, they look okay. But on the inside, they are full of wounds and scars that never heal, or take years, 20 years, 30 years to heal. So I want you just to bear that in mind while we go through our talk, and we'll come back to it a little bit later. But like with any topic, there's always good news and there's bad news. So I think a good place to start is with the good news. So the good news is, and funnily enough, when you hear it at first, you think, but how can that be good news? It is not good news. But there is an element, there is always a silver lining to a cloud. The good news is, principals and teachers, we are not alone. In South Africa, schools all over the country are experiencing bullying. And in the rest of the world, bullying has reached pandemic rates. It's crazy. Now, how is this good news? Well, this is good news because there is so much time and money and effort being put into researching why bullying has reached the levels that it has. And so what this means for us is, because it is such a problem, there are things being done about it. There are resources. There are places that we can turn to for help. So that is the good news. The bad news, however, is that unfortunately, even with all this research and money being spent, there is still no quick fix. There is no quick solution to bullying. And I cannot, unfortunately, stand up here and tell you how to get rid of bullying in your schools, because it doesn't exist yet. However, what I can do today is I can discuss with you a little bit more about what is bullying, about why it is so prevalent. And I'm sure that you can all agree with me that, bullying has been around for generations and generations and generations. Why the big drama now? Why is everyone on this whole big bullying buzz? Well, the point is because it's so much more dangerous today than it was 20 years ago when we were kids, or in our parents' generation. With cyberbullying, it follows these kids into their homes. They cannot escape it, and it is happening on larger and larger proportions. So we're going to look at why that is, why it is so much worse today than it ever was in the past. And then we're going to have a look at how do we address this problem collectively in our schools and in our society. So first of all, let's have a look at exactly what bullying is. Now, as I'm sure you're all aware, conflict is a very normal and natural part of life. We have conflicting situations all the time, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a part of how people interact. So how do we know when it's just a conflict or whether it is actually a bullying incident? Well, normal conflict happens between two people who have a disagreement or have a difference of opinion, who are both trying to assert their opinion to get their own way. That is a normal conflicting situation. So, for example, with sibling rivalry, you might have a little brother and a sister, and they're both fighting over the Xbox time because they both believe they deserve an extra 10 minutes. There's no imbalance, there's no unfairness, they just have a difference of opinion. And another example is perhaps your partner at home doesn't like to replace the toothpaste lid back onto the toothpaste. Not such a biggie, it's just a little bit of a difference of opinion. Now, in schools, obviously we have to handle all forms of conflict. We can't just leave the conflict and only focus on the bullying. Of course you have to handle conflict. So how do we handle conflict? Well, there's two ways we deal with conflict. Either we learn to give and take a little bit, we compromise a little bit, and we come to a solution where each party wins a little and each party loses a little. That's first prize. Second prize of dealing with conflict is we just get to the point where we realize, you know what, it's actually not worth the time, it's not worth the effort, I'm just going to let it go, and we accept it. So, for example, the lid on the toothpaste, perhaps you have fought with your partner every day for the last 2 years because they don't replace the lid on the toothpaste, and eventually you get to the stage where you think, you know what, it's not actually important. I'm going to leave it, I'll just put the lid on every day. And so you accept it. If you accept it, eventually you stop being irritated by it. So that's how to deal with normal conflict. But bullying isn't normal conflict, and I'm sure that most of you, if not all of you, know what the definition of bullying is. But the way we can identify bullying is by looking at 3 points. And the easiest way to remember it is with the acronym RIP, or rest in peace. So that's what we want to do. We want to send bullying where it should be and allow it to rest in peace. So the first thing is that a bullying incident is not a once-off incident. If 2 kids have a little fight on the playground and it happens once and it's over and it never happens again, it wasn't a bullying incident. It was just conflict. Bullying is repetitive. It happens repeatedly more than once over time. The second point is that bullying is always intentional. In other words, one party intends on hurting the other party, either physically or emotionally. It is intended to hurt and to cause pain. And I'm sure if you can think about a normal conflict, you don't really have an argument to cause pain. You have an argument because you have a point that you want to make and you want to be right. And then, of course, the third thing, and probably the most important of the 3, is that in any bullying situation, there is always a perceived imbalance of power. So what does that mean? It means that the aggressor, or the person that is performing the act of bullying, perceives that they are stronger or more powerful than the victim. And this can be imbalance in many ways. It could be that they are physically stronger, or bigger, or older. It can also mean that they have an emotional imbalance of power. They have more friends, or they have more self-confidence. They are more verbal and outspoken. It could be that they have been in the school longer and the person that they are bullying is new to the school. So there's always an imbalance of power where the aggressor seems to have more power than the victim. And particularly the victim believes this. The victim believes they are not big enough, they are not strong enough, they are not clever enough, they don't have enough friends. And so that is the easiest way of being able to tell whether an incident that is reported to you really is bullying or is it just a normal argument. Which takes us on to our next point. Why is bullying so prevalent? Why has it changed and why is it so serious? There have been so many cases in the last couple of years about teens, young teens, taking their own lives, committing suicide because of bullying. And this used to be something we never ever used to see. So why? Well, you know, we live in a totally different world to one that we grew up in. The world has changed completely. Nowadays, our kids have to deal with so many things that we didn't have to deal with while we were growing up. Number one, we're living in a world of technology, which has made the world a very competitive place. And it's made the world very fast-paced. So what this means is that our kids are under immense pressure. They have pressure on them unlike anything we've ever experienced. Another thing is that they are dealing with increasing poverty rates, specifically in South Africa. There are more and more kids that are being exposed to poverty and living in backgrounds of poverty. The rates of violence have gone through the roof. Then that's both domestic violence and criminal violence. And then, of course, you look at the breakdown of the traditional family unit and the increasing rates in divorce, which plays havoc on these kids' lives. And then, of course, we've got peer pressure. Peer pressure today is absolutely unbelievable. Look at alcohol. I mean, kids in primary school now are sneaking alcohol into the schools in their cool drink bottles. Drugs. There are drugs in every single school now is facing drug problems. Kids are having sex much younger than they ever used to. The research has shown that kids are starting to have sex at the age of 10. They're exposed to pornography from the age of 8. It's horrific. What's more is that we have these diseases, HIV, which is leaving a lot of our kids in the position where they have to become the adults. And we have children-led homes because the parents aren't around anymore. So what has this done? This has created an intense amount of stress and trauma in our kids today. They are facing a world that they have no clue how to deal with. They just don't know how to respond to these incredible challenges. And so what we're finding is, number one, that there's a decreased academic performance. Number two, that they're dropping out of school at a much younger age. Number three, that there is a concerning increase in antisocial behavior, such as violence in schools and bullying. And then, of course, the incredibly high rate of depression and anxiety that we're seeing, particularly in our teens. So what's happening is that both the bully and the victim are in the same situation. They are both traumatized by what's happening in their world. And they both feel absolutely powerless about how to deal with it. So they mirror each other. But the most interesting thing is, it's how they respond to this feeling of being traumatized and feeling powerless that creates the difference between the bully and the victim. So the bully acts out aggressively. What the bully wants to do is he wants to feel power again. He feels so powerless. He has to feel power, and the only way he thinks he can feel power is to push somebody else down. That gives him a sense of power and a sense of that he is capable and that he is worthy. The victim, on the other hand, withdraws. They become very passive and they don't feel they have power, so they become more quiet and more withdrawn, and which obviously opens them up to become the perfect victim for somebody who's looking for someone who's a little bit weaker than them to make themselves feel better. So what do we do? How do we actually address bullying? It's such an incredibly huge, traumatic challenge for us to deal with. What do we do, and how do we help these kids nowadays? Well, what I'm going to do now is just go through a little bit of what Life Talk does, and basically we work with schools. We've done a lot of full school programs where we work with the entire school and run campaigns with the school, the teacher, the children and the parents in order to get everybody onto the same page. And hopefully you can take out some tips of what we've done and what has worked, and you can try it in your own schools. So we run two different separate little programs. The one is obviously for primary schools and one is for senior schools, and we'll go through both of them together, or one at a time. Primary schools, we run two different campaigns, Be Kind campaign and Be a Buddy, Not a Bully campaign. And then high schools a little bit different. We focus on personal development and life coaching. So let's look at the primary schools first. What is Be Kind about, and why Be Kind campaign? Well, I think as Claudia also mentioned earlier, there's a saying that you can catch a lot more flies with sugar than with vinegar. So there was some research done in the 1920s, so this is how long it's been around, where a primary school teacher took 2 grade 4 classes, actually 3 grade 4 classes, and gave them exactly the same test. The results she discussed with the first class, and she really focused on what they got wrong, all of their wrong answers. The second class, she discussed with them what they got right, and then the third class, she just gave them their test back and she didn't discuss anything. And then she got them to rewrite the test. And funnily enough, the class where she discussed everything that they'd got wrong and nothing that they'd got right improved their marks by 19%. The class where she had discussed what they'd got right and not what they'd got wrong improved their marks by 71%. And the class where she hadn't given them any feedback only improved their marks by 5%. So what we can learn from that is, number one, any feedback's better than no feedback. Number two, positive feedback is better than negative feedback. So what we've done is we've turned bullying on its head. We no longer focus on how bad it is to bully and punishing bullying and criminalizing bullying. But we've changed tack, and we're focusing on how good it is to be kind, to be a friend, to be an upstander and stand up for people that are being bullied. What we need to do is we need to create a perception shift in these kids so that it's no longer cool to be that bully person, but it's cool to be kind. And it is possible. This is very possible. We've done it with smoking. Look at smoking 20 years ago. Everybody smoked. Everybody who was anybody smoked. If you didn't smoke, you were not cool. Nowadays, it's not so cool to smoke anymore. The whole perception of smoking has shifted. And there's very few people that stand in the smoker's corner now. Now it's the majority who don't smoke. And we can do exactly the same with being kind and focusing on being a good person. If we start from when they're in primary school, hopefully those are habits that they will maintain and hold on to until they get into high school. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, we have to focus on their emotional intelligence, or their EQ. And a lot of school is about focusing on intelligence, or IQ, but it's time that we also started looking at these kids' EQ, emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence is identifying what my feelings and emotions are, being able to identify them, and being able to control them and respond to them. So there are various ways that you can do this, and you can address emotional intelligence with primary school kids, and we recommend introducing various concepts to them, such as, number one, being able to identify their feelings. What am I feeling, and why am I feeling like this, and is it okay to feel like this? It is okay to feel angry. It's a normal emotion. We need to teach our kids that. It is okay to feel angry, but the way that you express that anger, that's the key. So we need to teach them how to release and express their emotions instead of bottle them up and sit on them so that eventually they explode like that champagne bottle. We also encourage you to speak to them about that inner voice. You know, we've all got that little voice in our head, that nyaka nyaka, that nasty, horrible one that goes, you're not good enough, you're not clever enough, you can't do that, you're stupid. And our kids even have that when they're tiny. We need to start teaching them from when they're little. That little voice up there, that little voice is actually wrong. So every time you hear that voice saying, you're not good enough, you say to that voice, I am good enough. And if we start to teach these kids these lessons, their emotional intelligence shoots up. We also need to speak to them about assertive communication, that it is okay for them to stand up for themselves, that it is all right for them to have a voice, but there's a right way to do it. There's a right way to communicate. Don't communicate aggressively. Don't communicate passively. Be assertive in what you say, and that goes a long way to dealing with bullying. We also really encourage kids to take ownership. You know, in South Africa, we've just got this crazy trend that's going on right now where it's just easier to play the blame game. It's not my fault. I'm sorry, I didn't do it, or I didn't mean it. So-and-so did it. I'm here today because of what happened yesterday. And we need to teach our kids from as early as grade 1, it's time they take responsibility and ownership for their lives. How we do this at Life Talkers, we've got a fantastic program and a book that I will be selling later if anyone's interested, called The Tug of Life. And we tell them that their life is like a tug of war. And on the one side, they have positive things pulling them, like their parents and their teachers and their school and their morals and their values. But unfortunately, on the other side, they have negative things pulling them as well, such as bullying, peer pressure, alcohol, sex, etc. And what they're doing is they're standing in the middle like this and they're being pulled all over the place. They can't afford to just stand there and allow themselves to be pulled. They have to pull for themselves. They need to take ownership and responsibility, and they need to be the anchor on their tug so that they can win their tug of life. The next thing we need to do is obviously change the perception in our schools so that kids realize that being kind is first prize, and being kind is the way to go, and being kind does get you further in life. How we do this? We do this through rewards. So we need to set up reward systems in the schools that rewards our kids for doing the right thing and being kind and being caring. When we do these workshops in the schools, basically what we do is we give them all little Be Kind bracelets so that they've always got them. They're visual, they see them. We get them to draw hands and make a pledge. Now, obviously, when you make a pledge, you put your hand on your heart, and we get them to make a pledge that they promise to be kind and caring. Then they draw their hand, they sign their name on the hand, and they stick it up on a wall somewhere so that everybody's hand is there. And every day they walk past it and they remember, oh yeah, I made a pledge. I put my hand on my heart and I made a promise that I'm going to be kind and caring. So these are just a few of the things that you can do in your primary schools. So have a Be Kind policy. Perhaps train peer mediators. We find that if we train the kids on how to deal with conflict from an early age, it is something that they carry with them for life. And there's nobody that's as good a mediator as a peer. You know, so often they think, oh, my parents don't understand. Oh, my teacher's so old, she doesn't get it. So train peer mediators to help these kids through the less serious incidents. Also look at restorative justice. Instead of just punishing, sticking the bully in a corner or sticking him in detention for 3 weeks, you know, we have to remember there's a reason why that bully is bullying. It goes back to all the trauma that they're dealing with. Punishment's not going to help him. We need restorative justice. Bring the two of them together to talk it out, to find a solution together. We need to verbally reinforce positive behavior and put those learners into a positive state of mind. Instead of focusing on the negative, let's focus on the positive and give them that positive feedback. Right, moving on towards the senior schools. What do we do in senior schools? Obviously, we've got to change tack. Now, in senior school, they do say, research says that if you teach a child something by the age of 8, they'll know it for life. They'll have it for life, a moral or a value. And so if you're trying to teach them morals and values after 8, it's going to be a whole lot harder. So for the high school kids, it does become a lot more work intensive. Not only are you training them about going forward, their lives going forward, and how to move along and progress properly and efficiently, but we've also got to deal with all the past hurt stuff as well. So we believe there should be a two-prong approach. Number one is help them with their personal development. Now, what does that mean? Personal development is developing their skills with themselves, intrapersonal and interpersonal skills with other people. Train them and teach them how to interact properly. And then to give them life coaching. Now, what is life coaching? Life coaching is being able to identify, where am I now? Where do I want to be? And how am I going to get there? So it's having a process in place and somebody that they are accountable to encourage them to set goals, to have dreams, and then to set a plan, but not only to set the plan, but continual sessions to actually hold them accountable, to see that they are taking the necessary steps to getting to where they want to be. So why is personal development and life coaching relevant to an adolescent? Well, as we heard earlier, their brains are still developing and are in an incredibly important time of development. Neural pathways are being created every single day. And if we create those neural pathways when these kids are young enough, they will maintain those neural pathways and they will become habits for the rest of their lives. Now, just as an interesting little side fact on that, does anybody know the age when a human brain is fully developed? 25. Yes, well done, 25. So that's quite interesting. So any of you have teenagers who are 18 and 19 and think they're adults and they know everything, or young adults who are 21 and 22, their brains are still not fully developed. And the last part of the brain to develop is that part of the brain that is responsible for wise decision making and thinking before you act. So if you were wondering, that's why car insurance is so expensive when you're under 25, and specifically for males. For females, it is a bit younger than 25. Sorry, guys, but we do pip you on that one. And then, of course, their emotional development. These adolescents, emotionally, they go through 75 different emotions in one day, and they don't know who they are. They don't know if they're Arthur or Martha. They don't know if they're up or down. And so they really do need some assistance and some support in that development. So why is supporting a learner's development process so important? As you all know, as kids grow up, they have various developmental milestones that they need to reach and achieve. And what happens is if they have a supportive environment and people around them to support them, then it becomes easy for them to reach that milestone, and they reach it. And once they've reached it, it develops their self-esteem. And they think, wow, I'm actually quite good at this. I'm a good person. I'm capable. And they also think, wow, the world is a good place. I have support. I have love. I have people around me to help me. But what happens if there is no supportive system around them when they're going through this development phase? They don't have enough support to reach those developmental milestones, so they miss them. And then because they haven't reached them, they feel bad about themselves. I can't do this. I'm so stupid. I'm not good enough. And when they start to feel bad about themselves, they feel bad about the world. The world's a bad place. It's an ugly place. So they try and comfort themselves by turning to drugs, alcohol, bullying other people, etc., etc. So what does all of this have to do with bullying? Well, we can answer that by looking at 3 questions. Number 1, what is the real problem? Number 2, what is the real need? And number 3, what is the ultimate solution? And what I have to say, and I know this talk is all about bullying, but bullying is actually not the real problem. Bullying is just a side effect of a much bigger macrocosm and a far bigger challenge. And so the only way that we're going to be able to deal with bullying is to deal with the bigger problem. And if we just try to deal with bullying, it'll be like trying to move a tree and just moving the leaves. Once you move away, the leaves will move back. If you want to move that tree, you actually have to move it by the trunk and the roots. You've got to pick up the whole tree. So the problem is not bullying. Bullying is just one of the effects. The problem is that our youth is traumatized and they are acting out. They are traumatized because of the world that we live in. Can we change that? We cannot change the world they live in. It is what it is. But hopefully we can go some way to helping them to deal with the trauma. The second part of the problem is that we have so many kids who don't have that supportive home environment, which means that they are not developing emotionally the way that they should, and which means that our kids are in emotional developmental crisis. So what's the real need? What do we have to do about it? We know what the problem is now. What needs doing? Well, number 1, we need education and awareness, exactly like we're doing today. We need first and foremost, we need you, the leaders of our schools, to understand what the underlying problem is. And we need you to take it back into your communities and share it with the parents so that they also understand what is it that's causing this huge problem, and to share it with the kids. Because the kids know there's something wrong. They know there's something not right, that they're not feeling right, but they don't know what it is. So let's start talking to them about what it is. Let's start telling them, we understand that you live in a hard world. We understand that you have challenges, and we are here for you. Then what we need to do is we need to support learners in 2 ways. We need to support them intellectually, which is always what school's been about, the traditional intellectual side of the child, but it is also time to start looking at the emotional well-being of the child. And I know that this is, for teachers, this is going to want to make all the teachers run, because already teachers have to be the mom and the dad and the psychologist, and they have to teach the kids, they have to make sure the kids do their homework, they have to tie their kids' shoelaces and sometimes even dress them. Now we want the teachers to take on the whole extra role. So this is something that is going to be scary for our school communities, but there are ways around that. And then third, we need to help these kids to process past trauma, to actually deal with what has happened in their lives. So research has shown that when a child or anybody, even an adult, is supported socially, emotionally, physically, when all areas of their well-being is supported, they are more resilient and more motivated to succeed. They have more self-esteem. They make wiser decisions, so chances are that they're probably going to stay in school, and they are less likely to bully or be a victim of bullying. So it's time to really support the child in all these various aspects. So our little piece of paper here, if we just took this piece of paper and we scribbled with it green crayon all over it to try and cover up the wrinkles and the creases and the scars, do we cover them up? We don't cover them up. Actually, they come through even more. So just trying to rub them out or go over them is not going to make any difference. So I said earlier that we really need to focus on life coaching, which is about moving forward, and on development. But we cannot do that in isolation. We also need to be providing counseling for these kids. If we do not provide the counseling, and if we just do the life coaching and development, then they just become like we've scribbled green stuff on top of them and we're trying to hide what's underneath. It's not going to make a difference. We have to introduce counseling, trauma counseling, in our schools for kids who have been dealing with difficult situations. Just as a final conclusion to my talk today, I just want to say that really it's about focusing on the whole child and changing our schooling mindset. So instead of it all being intellectual, we need to really understand that the soft skills are just as important. And that the soft skills, or the life skills, are actually like the soil in which we plant the seeds of the hard skills, which is the intellect. If we do not take care of the soft skills first, then we're planting those intellectual seeds into barren ground. And they're not going to they're not going to grow. So what we need to do is we need to take these kids and laminate them. This piece of paper, these pieces of paper that are all crumpled, they become weak. They're very easy to tear. This will tear and rip and damage. But if we give them counseling, we make them stronger, and we laminate them so that you can no longer tear them, you can no longer rip them, you can no longer crumple them up. And we will be left with a society that will be strong enough to become good leaders, will be strong enough to stand up for what's right, and will become kind and caring and stand up against bullying. So ladies and gentlemen, that's basically what I have to say today. It's been lovely being with you, and I will be around afterwards if anybody would like a chat. You're welcome to put your name down. I have a list if you would like to sign up to our newsletter, and thank you very much.